Thank you. Well, as you've heard, I'm a politician, not an academic or a presenter. And you'll not be surprised to hear that I've never used a PowerPoint presentation before. So this is a first for me. But I wanted today to present in full the case study of rebranding Scotland in 2004, which happened when I was First Minister. So for the first time, I think possibly ever, I'm in charge of a laptop with some slides, including some pictures that I've put together myself. So I hope it all works for you. And if it doesn't, I'll make up for that in other ways. I'll start with this slide. For those of you who are not aware, in Scotland, well, Scotland, as you will know, is part of the United Kingdom. And in 1999, for the first time ever, in terms of a democratically elected parliament, and for the first time for 300 years in terms of any parliament at all, the Scots voted for and were given their own parliament to legislate over domestic affairs. To great excitement, as you can imagine, still within the United Kingdom, but with autonomous power to legislate on the key areas of domestic policy. And one of the things that was said about the Scottish Parliament by those of us, and I was one of those who had spent a lifetime campaigning for this constitutional change, one of the things that we had said regularly was that having a parliament of our own would allow us to develop Scottish solutions to Scottish problems, to address long-standing Scottish problems, and try and turn them around and allow our country to move forward without the massive upheaval of becoming a completely independent nation. So this is Prime Minister Tony Blair, who created the Parliament as Prime Minister on the day that the Scots voted yes to great celebrations. However, 2 years in, when I became First Minister in 2001, there was still a great level of excitement, but Scotland was still, because you don't turn these things around overnight, performing at a level that would be described certainly in our country as sluggish. We had relatively low economic growth. We had just had the catastrophic events from a tourism point of view, and tourism in Scotland is responsible for about 500,000 jobs in our population of 5 million. Catastrophic events that year of foot and mouth disease amongst the animals on our farms, and the bombing in New York in September 2001, which had a massive impact on American tourism that year. And so we faced, in addition to problems, long-term problems in economic growth, specific problems in tourism. We faced increasing global competition, massive movement of jobs, particularly in computer manufacturing and mobile phone manufacturing, first of all to Eastern Europe and then to the Far East. And an issue that had always been particularly close to my heart, but had never really been a public issue in Scotland before, we faced long-term population decline. Scotland was an immigrant country where more people left than came, and that was affecting, in my view, affecting our economic performance and affecting the way that we felt about ourselves, the level of enterprise, certainly the level of cultural diversity, and our international image. And at that time, our population was predicted by 2007, 2008, that it would drop below 5 million, which would have been one of those marks. We'd always been just above 5 million. If we dropped below 5 million, then the effect on our national confidence and our international image, in my view, would have been very severe. So we faced all of these challenges. And as First Minister, I wanted to do several things. First and foremost, I wanted to reverse the population decline. And we wanted to achieve that in a number of different ways, which I'll explain. But I saw that as absolutely imperative. If we were going to be a successful country, we had to have an increasing and an increasingly diverse population. Secondly, we had to grow our economy more quickly and more sustainably. And in particular, we had to reverse what at that time was a temporary decline in our tourism industry. Thirdly, I wanted to raise the confidence of Scots and the confidence of other people about Scotland as a country. Fourthly, I wanted us to celebrate diversity and encourage diversity rather than, I think Scotland had been perceived in the past as a relatively homogeneous white, Northern European place, partly Celtic, as Dan Mulhall said this morning from Ireland. And my view was that the most successful places in the world were multicultural places, and contrary perhaps to the view that was taken elsewhere in Western Europe at that time, I wanted to encourage in-migration and greater cultural diversity. And lastly, we had to do more to promote Scotland abroad. We then conducted a significant international exercise in market research, based around 10 countries, ranging from the USA and Australia, traditional friends of Scotland, to countries that didn't have a great link with Scotland, Hungary, a number of other places that were relatively new to us in terms of trading or in-migration. And we tried to find out what people thought about Scotland, what their images were, and what they knew and didn't know. We found out that people felt that Scots were friendly. I hope that's certainly true. But we also found out that most of the perceptions of Scotland were based on a movie, Braveheart. And that most people thought that Scotland was just full of mist and mountains, nice castles, didn't know very much about the people that might be there and around these mountains or castles, and certainly didn't know much about our cities or many of the other things that we had today. People in this market research, people in all these countries, even those that should know us very well, were shocked to discover the level of innovation and research that had gone on in Scotland for centuries. That in education, for example, we had more universities, a higher level of concentration of universities than any other country in Europe, more medical science per head going on in Scotland than any other country in Europe. We were, at that time, the 5th biggest bank in the world. Although that changed slightly, obviously, in 2008. And they were stunned to discover that we had 6 international airports. And, in fact, there was actually one person in one of the groups for market research who was surprised to find out that we had roads. I think that they had only seen Braveheart. I thought that's what it was like today. So there was a level of shock at these facts. And those of you who were here this morning will have heard, I think it was Dan Mulhall who said this morning, that one of the things you have to do as a small country is attract people's attention. So the fact that these facts shocked some people gave us an opportunity. It wasn't just a threat to our future viability and success. It was also an opportunity because we could do something about it and attract attention with this information that wasn't necessarily widely shared. So in 2004, we set ourselves on a mission to get a message across about modern Scotland. And that message was to be that we're one of the best small countries in the world, and that we have the people, the authentic culture, the education and the enterprise to compete with the best. And getting that message across, we adopted a slogan, "Now is the time and Scotland is the place." And we set as an objective, primary objective, first of all, to retain homegrown talent. As is the case in many, many countries around the world, we had what we called a brain drain. Young people moving from Scotland to London and the southeast of England to get better jobs, to move to the capital city of the UK. We wanted to retrain those people who'd either moved to London or moved elsewhere in the world in the past, but also to attract new people to study, to visit, to work, and to stay. And we were trying to do that at a time when most governments and most politicians in Western Europe were trying to stem the tide of immigration. We're trying to put off immigration. We're trying to distance themselves from that. So again, there was an opportunity for us to be different and to send out a very, very positive message. The facts that we wanted to get across, that highest level of concentration of universities anywhere in Europe, the highest level of medical research anywhere in Europe, the fact that it was in Scotland that Dolly the sheep, the world's first cloned animal, had been created, the fact that we had this huge financial services industry, I think at that time the 6th biggest centre for financial services in the world, the fact that we had 6 international airports, 4 significant ones and 2 others that had international connections. The fact that in Scotland, our scientists over centuries had invented the television, penicillin, antiseptic surgery, the telephone. These key things that are part of everyday life and accepted throughout the world today were invented by Scottish scientists. And we had the largest in Edinburgh, every August, the largest arts festival in the world. So these are other basic facts, adding a real substance to the message and the image were what we were trying to convey. And the way in which we tried to do this, and I'm going to give you some examples, was to use those classic icons, the mountains, the mist, the castles, the things that people knew about Scotland, but to give them a modern twist. People knew about whiskey, but did they know about all the other things that we produced in Scotland? They knew about agriculture, but did they know about medical science? They knew about the castles, but did they know about the cities and the arts festivals and so on? So we wanted to show the people in these places at the same time as showing the places and the classic icons. And we wanted to do it with a twist of humour and modernity as well. And we wanted to emphasise a cultural diversity so that people saw more than their traditional view of Scotland, and those who were coming to Scotland felt welcome from whatever culture they were coming. Now, I'm going to try and do this. Katie's going to help me with this. I think it's quite ambitious in your first ever PowerPoint presentation to put a video in the middle of it. But this is just before we start it. One of the things that we did, and I'll explain the impact that it had, was we commissioned 50 images of modern Scotland. This short 30-second video uses all of those images to some music. And those images were to display what Scotland looked like today and why people should find that attractive, either to visit, to study, to work, or indeed to come and to stay with us. Here we go. No. Great. Excellent. And so basically those images, I mean, that was a very quick citing of the images, but you get the idea. Combination of academic images of famous Scots like J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter author, at that time the biggest selling author in the world, who came from Edinburgh. Images of, yes, of the mountains and the glens, and yes, of whiskey, but also of modern tartan fashion, and so on. The big festivals, the guy with the flag waving in the crowd is our biggest rock music festival every summer. So displaying this selection of images, but creating these images in order that they would then be used by all the Scottish agencies. So they wouldn't just be used by the government or by the tourism agency, but they would be used by people right across our national life to convey a consistent modern image of Scotland. This is the kind of advert that we prepared, combining selection of the images in each case and using the slogan, particularly at the entry points to Scotland, at the airports and the ports, the slogan, "Welcome to the best small country in the world." And that slogan was partly about persuading people that Scotland was that best small country in the world, people from elsewhere, but also persuading Scots to feel more confident in talking up the country and perhaps move away from what we called the Scottish cringe, which was a kind of embarrassment about being upbeat and positive and confident about how we described ourselves. We would highlight major events, use major events for this purpose as well. This particular advert was produced for an event called the Homeless World Cup, that some of you might have heard of, which is an international football event that happens every year now. It came to Scotland, I think, in 2006, maybe 2005. Again, a multicultural image with a bit of fun in it, attracting people to the idea that Scotland was a fun place to live, a place of cultural diversity and modernity. And we use these images in many different ways. But I suppose the message that I want to try and get across today is that an international promotion campaign, a rebranding, which is what we were trying to do of Scotland or anywhere else, is not successful unless you have the substance behind it. I think Dan Mahal made that point very well about Ireland this morning. So we didn't just base the campaign around the use of a selection of adverts and photo images. It was much more of a public relations campaign. We set out, for example, to influence the editors of major international publications, to influence the editors of publications in new markets. We did unusual things, like I wrote a letter as First Minister in Polish that was published in the Polish national press, asking Poles if they're going to come and work somewhere in Western Europe, to come to Scotland. So things that people would not have expected us to do. We did. We created a Chinese website, a version of a website in Chinese, a version of a website in Polish, and those versions were made available and promoted in country, rather than using simply our own traditional Scottish methods of communication. So we were trying to influence the influencers, but we were also trying to make sure that we got into those new markets in ways that were attractive and perhaps newsworthy in themselves. And we also made a very conscious decision to first of all, to reinforce the message at home, trying to make sure that Scots themselves, when they travelled abroad, were ambassadors for this message, but also that we used the existing networks. There were 45 million people around the world who claimed some form of Scottish descent. And traditionally that would have been associated with people living in America or Canada, maybe Australia, maybe South Africa. But it was also the case there were many people living in other parts of the world who had some Scottish ancestry of some sort. So we created a diaspora network, an e-magazine that was circulated to people who wanted to receive it in whatever countries around the world, who felt as if they had a historical connection with Scotland. We created a business network called Global Scots, which used successful business figures in other countries to train young Scots in globalizing their companies. And we also, because we have this as an advantage, and we like to exploit the UK rather than have the UK exploiting us, we use the UK's embassies around the world to convey this positive image of Scotland as well. So they, I think, had a more diverse message, which was good for them, but it was certainly good for us to use those offices, those embassies around the world that we didn't have direct access to, but we could access through the UK, the United Kingdom government. And we were also making sure that when people were attracted by this message, there was some substance behind it. The Fresh Talent campaign was our campaign for in-migration to Scotland. It was the campaign that said, we want you to come not just to visit Scotland, but to come and actually live here. We welcome you wherever you come from in the world. We set up a relocation advisory service, which was an all-round comprehensive service advising people on education for their children, how to get a visa, how to get housing, and so on. And that service was accessed by thousands of people who wanted to take up that opportunity. We made sure that at every entry point into Scotland there was a welcoming message, but also that people were welcomed into local communities afterwards. I went to Baltimore, which had been particularly successful in doing this in the USA, where they had the fastest declining population of any city in the USA, and had reversed that. And they used local associations of migrants. For example, Lithuanian Club was used to encourage people who came from Lithuania to integrate into the local community and to feel welcome. And we did the same thing with a big Polish society in Inverness and a number of other societies and local associations in different parts of Scotland. We worked with our universities and colleges to improve the overseas student experience and therefore dramatically increase the number of overseas students who were coming to Scotland, and some of you, I think, have benefited from that. We linked very clearly the companies who might come to Scotland with local colleges and universities to make sure there was a clear link between investing in Scotland and a trained workforce. And finally, we upgraded our tourism experience. I'm always struck, I moan about this regularly when I come to Berlin. If you come to Berlin and go to the Hilton Hotel, one of the biggest hotel chains in the world, you pay 17 euros for 24 hours of internet, Wi-Fi in your room. If you come to Scotland and go to a small hotel on the west coast of Scotland, you'll get free Wi-Fi wherever you are in the hotel. And I think that kind of change, upgrading the tourism experience and making us competitive internationally, was very, very important too. We also wanted to speak not just with a public relations strategy and not just with a level of substance to the message that we were putting across, but with a united voice. One of the moments that I remember when I became First Minister of Scotland in 2001, the year after, I was on an international visit, and I was announcing that a company was going to come to Scotland and create 200 jobs. And I went to the press conference that was going to announce this, and there was a logo behind like this that had SDI and no Scottish flag at all. And I was the First Minister of Scotland making this announcement. And I asked why there was no Scottish flag behind me for the press conference and why SDI was on the... And I was told that the department that had done all the work on this was called Scottish Development International, and they didn't have the Scottish flag as their logo, so I couldn't have it as the logo behind us on the boards. And that was a kind of example of stupidity of different organisations and agencies working in different directions and not pulling together a clear, unified message about what Scotland stood for in promoting the national brand. So we pulled the agencies together. We met every month with the leaders of the Tourism Agency, the Enterprise Agency, the universities, the Whisky Association, that was our biggest international export. And we got all of them to buy into these images and this message and to promote it as well. At home, we ran a huge campaign year after year called One Scotland, Many Cultures, and it became the theme of our national day, St Andrew's Day, which was about promoting cultural diversity and reducing religious and racial intolerance so that Scotland was actually a welcoming country, a good place to live, rather than simply us put that message out. People come to Scotland, feel disappointed, and therefore damage the brand. And we worked with different sectors. The universities were key, but also colleges, Whisky Association, the oil industry, our big international brands out there selling the same message as we were selling. And in terms of the results of all this, I look back and think it was a very short space of time. I moved on from being First Minister in 2007, and it was a very short time, obviously, to try and measure results. But we do know a number of things. First of all, our economic growth had been running behind the rest of the UK for well over a decade, and by 2007, our annual economic growth was at the same level as the rest of the UK and about to overtake them. We had the best inward investment, foreign direct investment for jobs and companies coming into Scotland of any region in the UK in 2006 and 2007. We've now had population growth for 7 years after decades of population decline, and we are now healthily well above 5 million, whereas it was predicted we would go below 5 million by this year, back in 2002. Within the UK, the historical trend of a significant number of people more moving from Scotland to London and England and Wales in general than moving into Scotland has been reversed. And for each of the last 7 years, more people have moved to Scotland within the UK than moved to London and other parts of the UK. Our tourism numbers increased, we reckon, by about as much as up to 50% at its height in 2006 as a result of the international efforts that we had conducted. And I think the other significant thing was national confidence. I think inside the country itself, particularly amongst younger people, there was a growing confidence, a belief in ourselves, which was important for the longer-term changes that we wanted to see. I wanted to finish with this slide because I'm not First Minister anymore, and this was very much a campaign that's associated, I suppose, with my time there. But I wanted to indicate that a lot of what was done back in 2004 has been continued, despite political differences and political change in government. And these are the two most recent adverts by that same body, Scottish Development International, that I mentioned earlier, who were promoting themselves as SDI back in 2001, 2002. They now use the Saltire, and they're still using it. But these two adverts are really quite interesting, I think. When I talk about classic icons with a modern twist, the first is a whisky glass with a wave, and the message, of course, is the home of whisky, but also of wave-powered energy, one of the big growth industries of the future. And we have potentially in Scotland 25% of Europe's wave power in the Pentland Firth on the north coast of Scotland, between Scotland and the Orkney Islands. And the second one, the home of the bagpipe, but also penicillin, making the point, people know about bagpipes, and Scotland and tartan. They don't necessarily know that penicillin was invented in Scotland and that today there's more medical research per head in Scotland than in any other country in Europe. So making the point about the importance of our modern academic strength, but with a classic icon to illustrate it. So the images and the content lives on, and I hope it's going to continue to be successful. We set out to change our own image at home, but also to change it abroad, to move from an image that was based largely on the past to one that was based not just on the present, but where we wanted to be. We wanted to move from being a country that was aging and in decline population-wise to one that was younger, more culturally diverse, and more modern in its outlook and its image. I think we did succeed over the course of the past decade in achieving that, and I hope that there are some lessons there that others might be able to use in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord McConnell. This particular time, if you could give another round of applause, please.
One's enough.
I think I share your sentiment. I did come up to Scotland when the Dead Sea Scrolls was brought on in. I was there for 2 days. But outside that, even though I'm down the border, I think Braveheart had a great image in my mind.
Yeah.
If we can kindly take a few questions.
Thank you very much for that great speech. My question might be slightly more political. I was wondering, has heard two facets. How big is the independence movement in Scotland, or has that train left the station? And say, for example, and I hope this happens in my lifetime, if the north of Ireland comes back to Ireland, would that be sort of be a catalyst for Scotland to say, wait a second, maybe we can do the same? Thank you.
If we can take about 3 and then...
Okay. I was going to enjoy answering that one.
If, when you're asking your question, if you can kindly introduce yourself to where you're from and your name, please.
My name is Umma Ali Musa. I'm from Nigeria, but I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Leipzig here. My question is, you made mention of one Scotland, many cultures, coming from Nigeria with many cultures. How did you tackle the cultural differences and religious differences that you mentioned?
Okay.
And take one from there.
My name is Mary, and I'm a Nigerian, but I'm currently a student at the Robert Gordon University in Aberdeen. And you're talking about Scotland and the rebranding of it. I know that Scotland has different counties. But I found out from studies that Aberdeen, being the oil city, it attracts little tourists. And from studies, it was said that because the hotels there are not so much, and it's more expensive for tourists to come in there. I don't know, is there any advice as to what should be done to like maybe increase the number of tourists that come into Aberdeen? Because I know if a lot of tourists come into Aberdeen, being the oil city, it's going to improve the economy. Thank you.
If you can take the 3.
Okay. I'll take the Aberdeen example first because it's very specific. On that north-east of Scotland, I think there has perhaps been a challenge over recent years because other parts of Scotland, the northwest, the Highlands, the traditional Highlands of Scotland, the cities in Glasgow and Edinburgh, have invested huge amounts, Stirling actually in central Scotland, have invested huge amounts in the tourism experience, whether that is renovating traditional castles and historic monuments, or whether it has been the creation of modern festivals or other themed in the Highlands, themed tourism around about the countryside, adventure holidays, and so on. And I think that has perhaps been, all of these ideas have been less enthusiastically taken up in the Aberdeen and the northeast of Scotland in that area. And I think that's partly because that area has relied on the oil industry for so long, the energy industries for so long, that they were the economy of that area was quite strong, and maybe not the same demand for expansion of tourism as there was elsewhere in Scotland. And I think as the importance of the oil industry gradually declines, as it's a finite resource, it's going to become important that there are other attractions for the economy in the northeast. Controversially, there is one happening at the moment, which is the Donald Trump golf development, leisure development, very controversial. But that kind of development in the northeast of Scotland, will raise the international profile of the area as a tourist destination. So, although that development is controversial, perhaps one of the good things that will come out of it will be that it will attract more people internationally to think of Aberdeen and the northeast as a destination for themselves. But I think the city needs to think more about tourism and be less dependent on one main industry, which I think they have been to some extent over the last 40 years. On cultural divides and how to campaign for one Scotland, many cultures, I mean, I think these issues are always difficult for politicians. And my view is there's only one way to tackle them, and that is to be absolutely upfront and unrepentant about the importance of diversity. We probably always did to some extent, but we certainly today live in a world where cultures, religions, races mix in countries all over the world. That is not going to change. If anything, it's going to become more and more diverse, our societies everywhere. And I think there's a responsibility on the part of leaders, community leaders, religious leaders, and political leaders to stand for diversity and to celebrate it, not to tolerate it. I think, sometimes people think they're on the right side if they just say, well, we should be more tolerant about each other. But my view is that cultural diversity and religious diversity is a good thing. It's a better thing than not being diverse. A country is more likely to be successful if you're diverse. California is one of the most diverse parts of the world. Look at the incredible success of the economy there, and whatever problems they have with their public finances. So that was the stand that we took, and we were basically relentless year after year after year in saying nationally that people should welcome the fact that we now have more varied cultures in Scotland. We had constantly had festivals and events that celebrated that. We would celebrate the Chinese New Year as well as our own traditional New Year. We would celebrate different religious festivals. We made a point of welcoming the people who came from Eastern Europe when they were not necessarily welcomed in other parts of Western Europe after European integration. And I think that was good. And we also sent out a very clear signal in our international work that we were not just about improving Scotland. Most of our work was about getting jobs into Scotland and getting investment and people into Scotland. But we, at the same time, I heard Ken's presentation this morning on Malawi. We also decided that we would give something back, not just take from the rest of the world, but give something back. And we developed a very strong partnership with Malawi in Southern Africa to assist with their development. And last year, about 80,000 Scots out of that quite small population did something during the year that helped development in Malawi. So as well as taking away from the rest of the world, we're also trying to put something back as well. And that was about, I think, again, leadership to say that we're a better society if we do that. And we did that in relation to religion just as much as we did in relation to race or ethnic culture. And on Scottish independence, it has been said that one of the reasons that the reason I stopped being First Minister in 2007, by the way, which the colleagues very kindly don't mention when they introduced me at the ICD, is that I lost an election in 2007, despite all this relative success that we're talking about. Lost an election by less than 1%, which was a painful experience. But I think it was partly because of the fact that we had actually developed a greater national confidence in Scotland, mainly through this campaign. And as a result, people decided, more people than ever before, decided that they would give the nationalists a try at government because maybe the time had come. So partly as a success of this, ended up losing an election in 2007. And at that time, it looked like independence for Scotland might be on the agenda. The nationalists had won the election. with about 34% of the vote. I had 33. But I think that has changed in the last 3-4 years, partly because by being in government, they've had to make some decisions that people don't like, and therefore it was much easier to be popular when you're in opposition for all the years that they had been in opposition. But also because the financial crisis and the decline of the banks, I think, has had an impact on economic confidence in Scotland, and the events in Ireland definitely had an impact in Scotland. I think our Scottish nationalists would always use Ireland as their main example. Ireland and Iceland, actually, were the two main examples of economic success by small countries being independent. And obviously both Ireland and Iceland have had their serious difficulties over the last 2 years, and that has dented the message for Scottish independence. So I don't think Scottish independence is on the agenda now or in the near future. It will always be part of the debate in Scotland, though. My own personal view is that we are very, very lucky to have a lot of autonomy within the UK, but also be part of one of the most powerful and best recognised countries in the world. So we have I always describe that as the best of both worlds, that we have Scottish autonomy within the UK, but we have the power and the presence of the UK internationally, and we would be silly to give that up.
Thank you very much, Lord McConnell. Let's kindly give him a big round of applause.
Got it?